Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It is a pleasure to have you all here today. We are gathered to explore the timeless concept of leadership, a topic that transcends industries and professions. The topic for today's webinar is Knowing Oneself on the Road to Leadership, 4 Lessons of Self-Knowledge. Well, this webinar will be recorded. So if you're registered, you will receive a copy of this webinar recording. Now, if you are referred by your friends or colleagues without registration, please feel free to reach out to me after the session, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of recording. Right? I would like to introduce ourselves. A little bit about myself, that my doctoral education background is in management science and applied mathematics. I have over 10 years of experience in leadership studies, and my major interests are leadership assessment, management science, decision-making, and business analytics. And I want to introduce and thank you for our speaker for today, Dr. Esther Gergen. Dr. Gergen is a full professor of leadership studies at our San Antonio campus. She has over 15 years experience in academia and more than 30 years in industry, where she focused on operations and project management and some professional business development. I'll have her to introduce herself a little bit more.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I am Dr. Esther Gergen. I am a professor of leadership studies at Our Lady of the Lake University. I am in of the PhD program here, and my focus in my teaching is on leadership theory, ethics, strategy, and some dissertation work with our doctoral students. I'm so happy to be joining you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gergen. Well, I think, we want to know a little bit about yourself as we started that. Can you just, if you have not get a chance, please take a minute to let you share a little bit more about yourself in the chat box, your name, where you're located, and your current role and organization, just so we can briefly introduce ourselves. And we do see in the chat box that we have folks from education, medical, and the healthcare and government. I think a lot of educators, as we are. Welcome. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for introducing yourself. Oh, we have SAISD, San Antonio ISD, for educators, principals. Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Well, regardless of your background of profession, I think leadership always plays a pivotal role in your life. So whether you are a business executive, an entrepreneur, or community leader, or educator, the principles of effective leaders are essential to the success. Okay. All right. We'll continue in the chat box to introduce yourself. Well, I'm going to introduce about our organization, so you know who you are here today, what the credential that we are here to provide this service of the webinar. Well, as I mentioned, Dr. Gergen and I are both with Our Lady of the Lake University, commonly referred to as OLU. As a few facts about OLU is that we have been around for 128 years, and the Sister of Congregation of Divine Providence broke ground in 1895 and established a private Catholic school, initially for women only. Today, however, we are a co-educational sex-accredited institution with 3 campuses in San Antonio, Rio Grande Valley, and here where I am in Houston. Our Department of Leadership Study has been around for almost 3 decades now. It began in 1998 in San Antonio and has graduated over 300 doctoral students. Well, the Houston campus was opened in 2010, and we have over 100 doctoral alumni in the Houston area. Today, the department is part of the College of Business and Leadership, and it is a ACBSP accredited, and it's the only leadership study department in the H-Town that offers a leadership PhD. We are a face-to-face cohort model that has a small faculty-to-student ratio, so students can easily collaborate with the instructor and classmates. And we meet all day, every other Saturday. So it's a great opportunity and program for working professionals for all over the 3 campuses areas. Just a few highlights of the program we offer in our department, that we have a 2-year trimester program for Master of Science in Organizational Leadership degree. It is a high flex format, meaning student can take it in person or through computer from anywhere. We also have a 4-year trimester PhD in Leadership Study program, and this is a face-to-face every other Saturday program. We also have some great dual degree options that you can do master with different program. For instance, MSOL and MBA, or MSOL, which is Master of Organizational Leadership, along with our PhD in leadership. Or you can do MBA with the PhD in leadership. We also provide some professional development training. If you have specific need or topic that your organization is in need, please feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Gergen. And then this, I want to show a little bit about some of our many affiliates that our alumni or our current student work for. Some of the area organization where they actually work and lead, okay? And then this next one are more about our valued affiliates. And I think we have a lot of audience today attending us that actually you do work from these organizations. So you might find some our alumni. Right. With that saying, I just want to mention that leadership is not just about managing people. It's about inspiring them, driving innovation, and creating positive change. So in today's fast-paced world, strong leadership is the cornerstone for progress and transformation. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Gergen for today's webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Soon, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon again for joining us for this session. We are so excited to share sort of a bird's eye view of one of the key concepts that is at the heart of this idea of leadership. But most importantly, it's kind of a first step to someone's leadership journey when you are trying to, as a scholar, a professional, a person in your organization, get on the road to leadership and developing exceptional and effective leadership. And that is knowing oneself. So I want to start today with a few quotes from some everyday leaders that are practicing leadership in various contexts and that have seen success with some of the ideas about self-knowledge, self-awareness, and the importance of it. So the first one comes from the CEO of LinkedIn, and it says, even negative feedback is important, right? And he says, you want to obtain it, but you don't necessarily want it to define you. You should define yourself. Ideas around self-knowledge also come from things about becoming strong leaders. So a quote from CEO of Glint, Jim Barrett, the best way to become a strong leader is to work on yourself, even more so than skills development. So again, a great idea about the first step towards becoming a great leader, and the first step being self-knowledge. From Dana Landis, from the Korn Ferry Institute, self-awareness is not a soft skill or a nice to have. It's playing out in your bottom line. This is about leadership effectiveness. So Dr. Soon mentioned the idea of inspiring and vision. And this kind of alludes to the idea that self-awareness is not just something nice to have. It is really playing out in the way we effectively lead and the bottom line that we're trying to drive for our organizations. And then finally, self-awareness gives you the capacity to learn, specifically to learn your mistakes as well as your successes. It enables us to keep growing. So with those ideas in mind and the importance of leadership and self-awareness in leadership, um, I want to kind of first touch base on what today's featured work is and who it's from. It comes from a American scholar by the name of Warren Bennis, who was not only an American scholar, but an organizational consultant. He is also considered a pioneer of the contemporary field of leadership studies. What he contributed essentially and at the heart of what he's known for or what he was known for is that he challenged the prevailing wisdom of his time when he first started to look at leadership by showing that humanistic democratic style leaders are better suited to dealing with the complexity of this idea that we call leadership and the leadership environment. So he was very much a proponent of the idea that the human part of being a leader was superbly important to actually becoming effective in your leadership practice. And so you see this book on becoming a leader, with where much of this material is from, starts in the very early chapters to focus on the idea of self-knowledge and self-awareness as a first step towards becoming effective in your leadership practice. So he presented this idea that there are four key components to self-knowledge. He starts by asserting that no one can teach you how to become yourself, to take charge, and to express yourself except you. Really important, and we'll circle back to that at the end. It's kind of his call to action in these early chapters when he talks about how you get on the road to becoming an effective leader. He talks about these four lessons of self-knowledge, and we're going to dissect each one today. The first is that you are your best teacher. Again, the idea that you have to own your own development and you have to own your own formation and transformation into effective leadership. The second is to accept responsibility, blame no one. We'll talk a little bit about why that is an actual intentional practice when we go over that particular lesson. Lesson 3 is you can learn anything that you want to learn. We oftentimes tend to build these barriers or walls to our perception of what we're capable of developing, and we'll dive into that idea as we talk about learning anything that we want to learn. And then the fourth lesson he asserts is that true understanding comes from reflecting on your experience. And again, we'll practice that a little bit at the end here when we talk about reflection and experience and how we apply specifically these four lessons towards self-knowledge. The idea is that knowing ourselves means separating who we are and who we want to be from what the world thinks we are and want to be. Really key concept. Because oftentimes we talk about and we hear that perception is reality. But Bennis asserts, and these ideas of self-knowledge assert, that oftentimes what the world perceives us to want to be or to be needs to be separated from who we truly understand we are and want to be. And so knowing ourselves is a critical step one on the road to developing effective leadership. So if we start to dive into the lessons, we see that lesson 1 is you are your own best teacher. And this lesson centers around the idea that learning is experienced as a personal transformation. Not only is it intentional, but it is triggered and or the foundation is experiences and how we use them to transform ourselves personally. Some modes of learning that are asserted in this first lesson are things like emulation, either someone that one knows or an idealized figure. We tend to refer to them as mentors. And so mentors are, or people that we know and we look up to, not just from a leadership perspective, but from a character perspective, from a personal perspective, oftentimes are great modes of learning. Also, practical accomplishments. Problems and opportunities often bring learned experiences. And so it's those practical accomplishments, actually experiencing and being in that opportunity and in those problems, help us to form a method of learning, not just from the experience, but about ourselves, how we react to things, what things we can do well, what things we can do a little bit better. A third mode of learning includes validation. So when we apply an idea and then we learn after the fact. Oftentimes that involves a little bit of risk taking because we're not sure if an idea is going to work, or we're not sure if an idea is going to turn out the way we wanted it to or the way we envisioned it. But learning from applying something after the fact is what is referred to as validation. So we have this idea, this passion, and we try it out, and then we decide, okay, did this work out or not? Was my instinct about this correct? And we learn about ourselves, not just from the idea, but again, about how much risk we're willing to take, whether we need to take a little bit more, or maybe be a little more intentional with those ideas. The fourth mode of learning can include personal growth. And this sounds a little bit broad, but really it's at the heart of it is transformation of values and attitudes. Personal growth truly requires for us to intentionally reflect on what our values are, what key things drive us, and what key things we see acted out in our behavior and our choices and attitudes every day, and how those need to either grow and expand or maybe be chosen a little more intentionally when we decide what we're going to stand for, because that is truly at the heart of how we lead and make decisions. So, two key motivators for learning include a need to know or a hunger for discovery that tends to dominate our attention, right? That tends to be an important motivator or trigger for when we start to push ourselves to learn. We feel this need to discover that tends to really take up our attention. Many of you in here are doing that today, right? You have this need for discovery that tended to dominate your attention, and so you decided to join us for some knowledge. And then the second is the perception of a gap between what one is and what one should be. Um, there comes a point in time where we tend to step back and reflect and think, I think there's a gap between what I want to be and what I am now, whether it's from a character perspective or from a development perspective, or in this case, from a leadership perspective, right? And then we identify that gap and start to drive our own path towards learning. The idea here is that learning is a way of fulfilling our own potential and expressing ourselves fully. So I'm going to invite you in the chat to kind of give me your ideas of a time where you had a hunger for discovery, or maybe even as simply as telling us or sharing with us what prompted you to decide to join us today at this webinar. If you'll put it in the chat, so we can kind of get an idea of what you've been experiencing and how these ideas might be resonating with you. And as you put those chats, I'll be revisiting the chat just to see the ideas that you've placed. I'm also going to be asking my colleague, Dr. Soon, to kind of keep an eye on that and share those things with us. So if we move on to lesson number 2 is accepting responsibility, blame no one. That seems to be an intuitive thing, but it is actually something that has to be very intentional as we navigate this path towards learning. And so the idea here is that major stumbling blocks on the path to self-knowledge are denial and blame. So Bennis talks about how oftentimes we tend to put blocks or stumbling blocks on ourselves when on ourselves and on our ability to learn and to develop self-knowledge through denial and blame. So the key reflection points for accountability can include several things. And I'll go through a few of these as we talk about this idea of self-denial and blame, and more importantly, responsibility. So the first is that we want to understand what we know and own discovering what we don't know. We often hear that phrase that it's important to know what you don't know, right? But truly understanding what we know, and then the idea is not just to know what you don't know, but to own and really take ownership for discovering what you don't know. Be intentional about those things that you realize you could be better at or know more about, and then going after them, right? And truly owning developing knowledge about them. Really important to the path to self-knowledge. Accepting responsibility for creating your own success Mentors we talked about in the first lesson are important. They're a way for us to visualize ourselves and to kind of trigger that desire to grow, but they can help. But we have to own our own success journey, right? So mentors can indeed be very helpful, but the idea of responsibility means that we own at very least half of that development of self-knowledge along with our mentors. Accepting responsibility requires discipline and transferring skills to new experiences. So, really important ideas, right? That it's one thing to accept responsibility and really acknowledge things, but it does require an intentionality and a discipline, that we not only accept the responsibility, but we also transfer that knowledge and that realization into skills and new experiences that help us to develop that new discovery of ourselves. The fourth is, if you don't know the answer, find it and have complete tolerance for every experience. Really important, right? Knowing what we don't know, and then once we understand what we don't know, we go and look for the answers. But more importantly than that, having complete tolerance for every experience, meaning that sometimes when we go look for answers, we discover things that might not necessarily be within our paradigm, right? We tend to refer to that in social sciences as cognitive dissonance. And that means that there's an idea that doesn't quite register with the way we see the world. So we tend to discount it or dismiss it because it doesn't register for us. And so this idea of self-knowledge and truly developing it means that we have to have tolerance for every experience, no matter how different it is from our own paradigms. And then the last key stumbling block is that we want to learn what others would regard tedious or avoidable experience, right? We want to learn from things that most people would avoid or maybe consider a little too hard or too taxing to deal with. Those are some of the platforms for the best learnings and the most knowledge. And key takeaway is that no one should be more invested in owning our development than us. So we should be the most excited, the most enthusiastic about owning our own development. I'm gonna go over to the chat and see what ideas we're seeing, especially from the first couple of lessons. Um, and so from John Graves, our world is changing every day. Whether personal or professional, expectations change based on organizational dynamics in terms of what is current and what the current challenges are. So be willing to adjust and knowing your limitations. Great insights, right? Limitations and understanding where we stand on those, also a really important part of being our own best teachers. A desire from Lavina, I'm sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Lavina Wilder says, a desire to learn more about areas I feel can help me personally and professionally. Absolutely. That hunger, that desire to really understand how much you know and chase after what you might not. From Michelle Thomas, increase knowledge and promote growth. Absolutely. That's at the heart of what Venice is trying to encourage us to do. And what really effective leaders do is that they really chase down that knowledge, especially the knowledge about themselves. Okay, we'll move on to lesson number 3. Lesson number 3 is you can learn anything you want to learn. Really important lesson because we tend to, a lot of times subconsciously, not fully aware of it, we tend to limit ourselves on our own growth, right? We tend to say, oh, I'm kind of set in my ways, or that's worked too well for me, so I don't think that changing it would benefit me in any way, right? And so this is a key lesson. And the key is to realizing the promise of leadership is full deployment of yourself. And when we limit ourselves on what we think we can learn or what we think our developmental limits are, then we don't quite get to full deployment of ourself. And so key reflection points for learning anything that we want could include things like seeing the world simultaneously as it is and as it can be. Seems kind of logical and intuitive, but oftentimes when we see the world, our reality, the way it is, we tend to not be brave enough to see it as it can be. We tend to limit the idea, and we tend to think This is how it is. I'm not sure it's ever going to change. Or sometimes we limit our ability to envision or dream of a state that it can be. So really important to think about how we might limit that, and that might limit our full deployment. Second, understanding what we see and acting on our understanding, really important. Oftentimes we see things, we think we understand them, but we really just observe them without a full understanding. So the idea is that we develop full understanding of things, not just of what we're seeing, but of how we personally take it in, how we process it in our own mind, and how we might develop an understanding. Third, to embrace and absorb what we can and we want to understand. Fourth, to have an appetite to have experiences rather than being experience averse. Really important concept, takes true intentionality and practice. What we tend to do in our PhD program, for example, in leadership studies with both our graduate and PhD students, is we challenge them to become holistic learners. And so we don't only ask them to learn key phrases, key terms, textbook information, and develop the practical knowledge, but we also ask them to think about how they're growing spiritually and how they're growing in the heart. So we do things like challenge them to go to experiences that they've never been to, maybe a 12-step program, or to go to a different religious or spiritual experience than their own, because it helps them to grow that empathetic muscle. But more importantly, it helps them to begin to challenge themselves to have more of an appetite for experiences that they either don't know or that they've been averse to. Helps on the road to self-knowledge and to really experiencing the world around you. Fearlessness, optimism, and confidence in and for new experiences is something that is very well promoted when we're trying to grow our self-knowledge. And the idea here is that no one that is afraid of failure can fully develop, so be not afraid of failure. Key idea, right? That we are not afraid of failure, because as we saw in lesson number 1, failure and experiences and problems are often the breeding ground for some of the best lessons, and some of the best ability to grow our own limitations and to really develop our self-knowledge. So if we go to lesson number 4, is the true understanding comes from our own experiences. So reflecting on experience is a means of having a Socratic dialogue with yourself. For those of us who have been experienced in the college experience, or the very first time that we're sitting in a learning environment and we're called upon to give our opinion or to see if our knowledge applies, just randomly called upon. We know that idea of the Socratic dialogue, but we don't quite apply it usually to having that kind of dialogue with ourselves. It's usually in a classroom with other people, with colleagues, in an intellectual dialogue or conversation with someone else. But what Bennis is challenging us to do as leaders, and in developing our knowledge of ourselves for effective leadership, is that we have that kind of dialogue with ourselves, so that we ask the right questions of ourselves, right? Things like, what really happened in an experience, a situation, or a problem? Why did it happen, right? Do I understand not just what happened, but what are the reasons that it happened? What are the various layers, right, that caused this event? And then what did it do to me? We often start with what happened, why did it happen, and we tend to stop there. Really important to move forward into the what did it do to me. We don't often stop to intentionally think about, how did it change me? What did it make me challenge? Are there values that I thought I truly understood about myself that I changed or were challenged as a result of this event? And then what did it mean to me? Meaning making is truly at the heart of developing self-knowledge, but more importantly, of this intentional Socratic dialogue that we have with ourselves. What did it mean to me? How did it change me? And soon here in a little bit, we're going to try to reflect on something and kind of share a little bit about how we might be applying these things. Key idea here is that nothing is truly ours until we understand it. And these questions, such as what did it do to me and what does it mean to me, helps to gain true, thorough understanding of an experience that then gives us knowledge about ourselves, that then feeds into how we become better at leading, at interacting with people, and at truly developing our values. And the other idea is that when we understand, then we know what to do. When we truly have a full and thorough understanding of something, we tend to be able to put it to practical application and use, not just for ourselves personally, but professionally, and of course, in our leadership knowledge. So feelings are raw, unadulterated truth. But until we understand why we are, for example, happy or angry or anxious, the truth is truly useless to us, right? So the idea here is that we can feel something, but until we truly understand why we are feeling that, we can't really use it to improve and to create that self-knowledge. So let's go into applying some of these ideas. What I want everyone to do is think of a formative life or leadership experience, right? What might that be for you? Most of us can think relatively quickly about one thing that we truly feel changed who we were, whether it's formative in life or in leadership, professionally or personally. And I want you to think about that for a couple of minutes and think about answering some of these questions. These questions are structured around the 4 lessons. So, one, you are your best teacher is the first lesson. So, questions like, what did I force myself to learn from this formative life or leadership experience that I'm thinking about? What did I force myself to learn? The second lesson is about accepting responsibility and blaming no one. So the question we'd like you to reflect on is, are there parts of this leadership or life experience that I have not owned in changing? Are there parts of this experience that I have not truly taken on in changing? And then lesson number 3, you can learn anything you want to learn. Questions like, have I felt fear hold me back from taking something new on that would fully deploy my passion or that curiosity that I have, right? Have I felt fear or let fear hold me back from taking something new on that would deploy this passion that I'm feeling? And then the fourth lesson, true understanding comes from reflecting on your own experience. So the question that we'd like you to reflect on is, how can I invest more time in dialogue with myself about this particular life or leadership experience that I'm reflecting on? So what we'd like you to do is think about that formative life or leadership experience, and answer one or a couple of these questions about that experience in the chat for us so that we can kind of talk about it, share, and kind of start to learn, take the initial step into reflecting on these things and these 4 lessons of self-knowledge. So I'm going to go over to the chat and look at our activity here. So I know there's several things that have been coming up on the chat, probably with the 4 lessons first. And so I'm going to talk about some of those or share some of those as we start to dive into this dialogue. And then as we go, if you guys will start to put some of those ideas, this formative life or leadership experience, any of the 4 lessons, the questions associated to them here on the screen, if you'll share with us if you feel comfortable. So somebody shared with us earlier that they consider themselves a lifelong learner and growing themselves as a leader is something that they strive for. That was Claudia Ramos Coto. Thank you, Claudia, for sharing that. It's great to know that there is already a curiosity for you to learn and develop that self-knowledge. Jennifer, shared with everyone, I am at a crossroads of where I want to go in the future. I'm currently a principal and want to seek out other leadership opportunities. Really great insight, right? Goes along the lines of you can learn anything you want to, and that your experiences really define how you start to get to know yourselves. Oftentimes, we're on a path, and then we discover certain things about our values where we become aware that some things that we thought were really important to us from a career perspective might change or might not be as important. And it leads us to this idea that we want to pivot. I'm going to go down here to the bottom to see if we have some learning. So some lessons, and we do. So thank you for sharing. We'll come up here and it says from Marisa Gonzalez, turning 40, reflecting on experiences and reflecting or paying attention to important things. We start to reprioritize for certain. And so thank you, Marisa, for sharing that. Definitely reprioritization is a big part of reflection and self-knowledge. So Marisa also shared that after a project or presentation, I do reflect on what I learned or what I could do better and make note of that. Great way of reflecting, really noting it. Some interesting that you say the word note, because some of this Socratic dialogue with ourselves is kind of needs to be intentional, but it kind of gets tricky. How do I do that, right? Oftentimes, a big suggestion that is effective for a lot of leaders is to it is to blog because helps them to share their thoughts about themselves with others. Also, some like to do to keep journals, right? Journaling is really one of the key things that many leaders that have developed this self-knowledge skill do often, is to really journal and reflect, whether it's privately or sharing those ideas with others. Finding the time to really reflect is a challenge, Linda Pennington tells us. Given busy schedules and work, definitely. I need to make it a priority, and if I want to improve my self-awareness, most definitely. Time is a challenge for all. Really great insight and important to think about. But it's also important to think about that oftentimes the reason we're so busy is because we're tackling things that we could improve if we just took some time to develop that self-knowledge that leads to more effective ways of interacting, of leading, of problem solving. And so it's a good investment if we kind of really do it intentionally. Somebody said lesson 3, I definitely let fear hold me back. And this is Amy Weaver from starting a business that completely tapped into my passion. I was afraid I didn't have the knowledge or the skill, and I didn't have the resources, so I thought I would fail. So again, failing is often disguised. Failure is often disguised, or blessings, excuse me, are often disguised as failures. And I think that's a big lesson in Dr. Bennis's book that talks about how we tend to set up these barriers for ourselves, and we tend to think that we don't have the right skill or we're not sure how it's going to turn out. Many of us who are on a leadership journey also tend to be type A's. And so we want to know for sure that something's going to work. And so that's one of the barriers that Bennis is referring to when we think about how we get on a better road to self-knowledge. From John Graves, leading a health system through the height of the COVID pandemic. Wow, what a great leadership experience to share that I'm sure was extremely formative. He says, allowed me to continually review the 5 exemplary practices of leadership. Thank you for sharing that. Kuzes Parsner tells us that there's 5 exemplary leadership practices. A lot of those are actually fed by or have a foundation of self-knowledge. So really great connection. 2, responsibility to remove staff fear and build their confidence and skills. And then very grateful for my education and leadership, major impact. Awesome to share. Oftentimes the educational leadership, the education that we receive might not necessarily be in leadership, but also helps us to understand the things that we have learned along the way. Thank you, John, for sharing that. George O.T. says, I need to force myself to accept that transformative change is not possible unless with fear in the air. Very true. I love that phrase, fear in the air, because we can truly sense it, right? When we become risk averse, we can sense it, and we kind of know why all the time. We don't actually always stop to reflect on it, but we do know why. The air should be cleared of fear and passion, and love allowed to prevail. So transformative results dethrones fear, lifelong reign, and take the crown of glory. Great way to phrase it, right? We can actually clear it. And I think today's ideas center around that spirit that we really need to invest in knowing ourselves, developing the knowledge, really becoming solid in our values, because it's character that helps us to navigate against fear and towards that passion and that risk taking. Jennifer, to everyone, I've had so many great leadership coaches, and it really impacted me and my leadership. This is something I am thinking about. I love seeing staff become successful with my support. This is something I would love to look into. That's amazing. Yes, a lot of times as leaders or budding leaders or established leaders, much of what drives us are things that we don't necessarily focus on in organizational context, right? One of the first quotes that we talked about today is that these idea of self-knowledge is not just something nice to have. So that alludes, Jennifer, to the thing that kind of drives us oftentimes as leaders, right? And Bennis was the pioneer of saying these humanistic things that drive us, these things that really ignite our passions, are at the heart of what we want to know about ourselves to develop that exceptional leadership. It is truly what inspires and motivates people, is to really understand that about ourselves, because when we do and we get on that road to self-knowledge, we tend to live it out every day in our behaviors, our choices, our decisions, the way we interact with people, and that's really at the heart of how effectively we can lead. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those great insights and those reflections. We are going to be providing this particular set of questions for that can ignite and get you on the road to self-knowledge and self-reflection, and really journaling or trying to kind of understand what these things mean to you. We're going to share this after our webinar in a link that we're going to provide you with materials, because this is just a brief first step. You can continue to work on these questions as you journal, or whatever modality you decide to take on this Socratic conversation with yourself that'll lead you on the road to self-knowledge and really applying self-knowledge to how you better your leadership practices. So let's talk about some key takeaways. What is our call to action today with regards to these ideas and these 4 lessons on self-knowledge and getting on the road to better leadership? First and foremost, people begin to become leaders at the moment when they decide for themselves how to be. Really important takeaway, right? You begin to become a leader in that moment, in that experience where you decide for yourself the kind of leader that you want to be, and understanding who you are, what your values are, and how you reflect on your ownership of your own progress and growth. Second, self-knowledge and self-invention are lifetime processes. Really important piece. Many of you expressed, I really want to focus on this. I feel like I should be spending more time on these kinds of things to ignite my passion, to know myself. Just remember to be kind to yourself, because it is a lifelong process. It's important to get on the road and stay on the road, but it is a lifetime process. And it's something that is going to be a continuation every day as you build not just your self-knowledge, but your leadership skills. And then I'm going to circle back to Bennis's quote, right? No one can teach you how to become yourself, to take charge, to express yourself, except for you. Really important call to action, right? That it is us and each and every one of us. So at this time, if you have any questions or additional questions for me, or additional thoughts for myself or Dr. Soon, please do type those in the chat box for us so that we can do some question and answer.
And I have unmuted all of you. If you just unmute yourself from your end, you feel free to talk.
Any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I just saw a comment from John. Thank you for the webinar and time. Thank you, John, for joining us. So if there are questions, please do feel free to type them in the chat, and we will respond to any that we don't get to. I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Dr. Soon, again, so that as you guys think of questions, she can kind of share some additional information about our university and our programs, and the wonderful things that we hope we can share with you and continue in your continuation on your leadership journey.
Thank you, Dr. Gergen, for your energy and great information for leadership and self-awareness. And for sharing this important way we can also use leadership to renew ourselves. I'd like to take a few minutes to share our department's future events with you. As you can see here, we have planned the webinar theory for the fall 2023 and spring 2024. And please mark your calendar for our next webinar that is on November 7th, next month, which our topic will be organizational culture, its effects, and how leaders can shape it. And we will also have leadership excellence panel that we planned to have in next semester, which is March 2024. And the topic will be leading teams through change. And we're now called for panelists. So if you know anyone or you yourself are interested to attend, please feel free to reach out to me. And then if you or your organization, your team are interested in particular topic or any training, please also feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Gergen to schedule an event for specific topic discussion. And so for leadership study events from our graduate school that we are currently admitting for the fall 2024 cohort for our PhD program in leadership study. And then actually tomorrow, October 11th, we do have a virtual info session that regarding for the program. If you're interested, please feel free to join us. And follow that, we have an instant decision event for all 3 campuses that if you are interested to submit any application, feel free to join us. Okay, this is actually the webinar that I just mentioned about our next month's webinar with topic of organizational culture. There's a QR code on the right. Please take a moment to scan it to register so you don't have to wait till the next email or notification. Please take your phone to scan it and register. Again, this will be November 7th, next month at noon. Okay, Dr. Gergen, I believe, will also be our speaker on this topic. Okay, Dr. Gergen, if you could briefly give us an idea about this topic, what it is about.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So on November 7th, we're going to do another webinar and we're going to focus on organizational culture. We're going to talk about how every organization is sort of an entity in and of itself and because of it, has its own culture that we have to navigate and work through. Oftentimes, how we apply leadership and how we practices is very much affected by the culture of our organization. And we talk about how it affects how we lead, but also how we as leaders are responsible for and can indeed change it or shape it to what we want it to be to make the processes and the organizational success more relevant. And so we'll talk about some of those key ideas in this particular November 7th webinar, and we do encourage you to join us for that. I also do want to piggyback off of Dr. Soon and encourage you to attend our information session tomorrow. We will provide some great information about our graduate and PhD programs. That may be something for some of you who said, I'm kind of at a crossroads and I really want to go this way in my path as a leader. That might be something that we would provide you with some insight as to how to increase your knowledge and your education towards that goal or that vision.
Thank you for sharing that insight of the next webinar. And then also I mentioned this panel that we are planning for the spring in March 2024, the leading teams through change that right now we have planned on March 5th. Please also scan the QR code if you're interested to attend, or if you are interested to be a panelist or someone that you think might be a very good person to share their passion and great experience in leadership, please feel free to reach out to me as well. And then for this, we plan to have 3 to 4 panelists to share their insight of leadership, we will have some of our PhD alumni that actually attending for this to can give us insight about their experience from our program and then their takeaway, how that has helped them to change or transform in their position as a leader, and then how their vision about leadership and how they actually lead the team through all these challenges and the difficult times. Okay, so please feel free to scan the QR code to register for this one. It is free for now. We will plan give you more details in the near future. Okay. All right, and the next one will be the info session. Both me and Dr. Gergen has mentioned that will be tomorrow. And at 12 o'clock, this will be a combined session with all the three campuses from Houston, San Antonio, and Rio Grande Valley. So whichever campus that you're close to, feel free to join us. We'll have faculties and staff that that will be join this info session and to provide some insight about the program itself. So please feel free to scan this QR code if you're interested to know a little bit more about this program. Regardless, it's a PhD or MSOL, a master degree, we will provide some information and details about the program. All right, and then next one is our instant decision event, which will have different date and time for each of the campus, and then you can actually visit the campus and meet the faculty over there. And so please write it down or mark it on your calendar because they're on different dates and time. So for instance, if you're close to Houston and then you want to visit us, it's October 21st, which will actually have a teaching happen that day. If you happen to visit us between, I teach all day, so we would like to invite you to actually attend our actual class to observe how the class is running and then to actually hear from our current students, their experience about learning with us. So welcome to go to any of those campus that is close to you to visit us, visit our students, our faculty, and then our campus. All right, just want to kind of give you a little bit overview about how our PhD in leadership study, the journey of it, that this will be a 4-year program that if you are about to enroll next fall and then will be 2024 fall semester, then you will be graduate in the 2027, okay? And then actually Dr. Gergen's topic today is very related to a course that we offered here for 9320, actually semester 2 for organizational leadership, and also touch a little bit about leadership theory in 9310, as well as some of the leadership assessment that I normally teach about how to actually to measure your self-awareness. Okay, and then I think the next topic regarding for organizational culture will be something about 9330, that organizational leadership policy and then culture. So those are some of the topic actually we do cover in our degree plan. So we do provide very systematic theory and also practical classes in terms of leadership studies. All right, with that being said, a few key points I want to summarize that we do offer master and PhD program in leadership study in all 3 campuses in Houston, San Antonio, and RTV. And we are face-to-face cohort model with small faculty to student ratio to encourage collaboration with all other professionals. And we meet every other Saturday to support working professionals. And we have all this different combination with dual degree options as well. All right. Okay. So that kind of conclude our webinar today. I do want to remind you that after today, after the session, we will email you with the recording of today's webinar, as well as some info session flyers, and also complimentary handouts that Dr. Gergen was sharing with you, so you can continue practice as a start to improve your self-awareness, right? And also, so I believe after this session, when you close, there might be a survey popped up. Feel free to can fill in that survey to give us some feedback, or just send me an email, reach out to me or Dr. Gergen with any questions, topic, your interest or feedback, anything. Just feel free to shoot us an email. Right, so as we conclude this webinar, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for joining us, for investing your time and energy into this webinar to explore the leadership. It is our pleasure to bring this webinar to you. Okay, feel free to stay to chat if you want to, and we will come back to some of the questions that, if you have not, we have not answered you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in future webinars and maybe in one of our information sessions where we'd love to talk to you about our programs.
If you want to talk, just unmute yourself. I have opened the, I have unmuted everyone.